For the most amount of flexibility, you'll want to keep your layered Photoshop files, but most likely you'll also need to send files to clients or share them with others in different file formats that are smaller and easier to transfer. And Photoshop has several different ways to do this. I'm going to start with the Save As command. So by selecting the File menu and then choosing Save As, you'll notice that Photoshop has a very large list of different file formats that we can export to. I'll go ahead and choose JPEG for now, and let's rename this. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put _flat, but you may or may not need to do that because for a lot of people, just knowing that they're saving as JPEG is enough to tell them that it will be a flat file because JPEG doesn't support multiple layers. But I'll go ahead and select that and then click Save. Choose my JPEG options such as quality, click OK. And if we move to Bridge, we can see that that file has been exported. Here's our flat JPEG. Returning to Photoshop, we're still working with the multi-layered PSD file. So that's a nice way to just save out an image in case you need to email it or send it to someone. But a lot of people save in one of four formats, either JPEG, PNG, GIF, or SVG. And a lot of times people use the same settings over and over. And if this is the case, you might want to take a look at the File and then Export options. There's two options here. There's a Quick Export and an Export As. Right now, my Quick Export says JPEG, but the default, I believe, is PNG. But you can set this however you want by choosing Export Preferences. Then select the file format that you want to export to. In this case, I picked JPEG, and I'll set the quality to 85. I'm going to ask Photoshop to export the files to a folder next to the current document. So this means if I'm working on a bunch of images and I do a quick export, Photoshop will create a new folder and just save all the exported assets into that folder. You could also have it ask you where to export each time. I want it to keep the copyright and contact information, so I'll include that. And because these are probably going to be posted online, I'll convert it to sRGB. Once I click OK, that becomes my default setting when I choose File Export and Quick Export as JPEG. I'll go ahead and select that, and then we can browse in Bridge. We see the new folder of our assets, and if I double-click to open it, there is that JPEG. Okay, let's return to Photoshop again. Now, let's say I need to export this, but at two different sizes. Then I'll choose File, Export, and we'll go to Export As. We can see that it's going to export the entire document as a JPEG with a quality of 100%, which of course I can change. I can also change the image size. So if I need this to only be 1200 pixels, I can just enter that in and it will be sized down right here as it's exported. I could also add padding using the canvas size. I'll include the copyright and contact info, convert to sRGB, and choose whether or not to embed the color profile. So I'm exporting it at this one size, but you'll notice that I can also choose to add additional sizes on the left-hand side. And there's a number of different presets that I can choose from, and I can also change the suffix. Now, I only need to export it at this one size, so I'll click the trash can in order to get rid of that, and then choose Export. I can rename it, and in this case, I probably should because I've resized it down, so I'll put 1200px after it and save it in that same Assets folder. When it's finished, it'll close the dialog, and I'm back to working on my multi-layered Photoshop document. But what if you're working with images that have multiple layers and you want to export each of those layers as a separate file? Or maybe you have a layer group and you want to export the layer group as a separate file. We can use the Export As to do that as well. So let's say that I want all four of the small photos to be exported as separate individual images. I'll select one, hold down the Shift key, and then select the tomatoes to select them all. Then hold down the Command key on Mac or Control key on Windows and click on the logo layer group. So now I have a layer group plus 4 individual images selected. I'll choose File and then Export, Export As, and look, I get the same thing. I just get one flattened file. And that's because there's a little secret to saving out individual images. Let's cancel out of here and instead choose Layer and then Export As. When I'm in the Layer menu, I'm telling the Export As to look at the layers and look at what I have selected, and it will list them on the left-hand side. So if I want to change the file format for any of these, I can just select them, and then under File Settings, I could either change the format, or I could boost up the quality, I could resize them, or use any of these additional options. When I click Export and then choose Open, Photoshop will export those individual layers so that when I return to Bridge and we look in the Assets folder, sure enough, there are all 4 of the small JPEGs plus the logo saved out as a PNG file. So, whenever you need to save off copies of your documents or layers within documents to different file formats, use Save As to access the greatest number of file formats, or you can use Quick Export or Export As for additional options such as resizing the image, including metadata, converting to color space, as well as obtaining the fastest and highest quality compression options for saving JPEG files in Photoshop.